Today is Thursday, December 24th, 2020, and the third day of Fiendmas. Hello, Fiendlings, how the hell are ya? I've been kicking back here at HQ and pondering the future of sentient intelligence. After reading the news, I'm further convinced we wouldn't recognize sentience. We certainly don't have much of it down here. I didn't want to talk about that, however. Instead, I want to talk about Neptune. Neptune is the eighth known planet in our solar system and was discovered in 1846. It is 30 astronomical units, or AU, away from the Sun. In case you've forgotten, a single AU is the distance between the Sun and Earth. That's a long damned way away. Although it's the smallest of the gas giants, it's also the most dense and has a surface gravity near that of Earth. Weird, eh? For more facts on Neptune, pictures, and etc., see the link in the show notes leading to the NASA site. Interesting stuff. Be safe, have a great day, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Here's episode 3 of Derelict Trident. Chapter 4. Lieutenant Oakes, S&R Black Company's pilot, was already having a bad day. Although the damage report didn't list any significant problems, that didn't mean it was all good. The ship had sprung another micro-radiation leak, and Noble would have to take the reactor offline until they could fix it. This close to home port, they normally wouldn't bother. If you were a few hours from home, you didn't sweat things like micro-radiation leaks, so long as they weren't venting inside the ship. Besides, the leak wasn't exactly deadly, even without a suit. The leak itself wasn't the problem. The problem was that the creatures they'd encountered at Mira had an appetite for both radiation and CO2. That meant relatively small leaks could attract the exosolar life forms. Considering what they'd just been through, he thought that was the last thing they needed. Noble was down in engineering, probably suited up and cursing at the reactor as he tried to find the leak's source. When the engineer had seen the ship's damage report, he'd been so angry he'd ground his teeth before heading aft. Oakes would have found it funny if not for the fact they were about to rendezvous with another dead ship. This time, it was one of their own. You don't know anyone's dead. Oakes hissed between his teeth. Yeah, right. No one was answering comms. The ship appeared out of control, and yet he was supposed to believe everything was fine. Bullshit, he said aloud.
Did you say something?
Black asked. Oakes glared at the hidden speaker. No, Black. You come up with a burn plan?
Yes, Lieutenant,
Black said. The hollow display on his console lit up with the steps for the burn and their final attitude predictions. Okay, that will do, he said. Reserve calculations?
we will have enough fuel to reach Trident,
The AI said.
but not much beyond that.
Great, Oakes said. So evasive action as a last resort.
That is my recommendation, Lieutenant.
He thought he detected sarcasm in her voice, but wasn't sure. Hell, he wasn't sure of anything anymore. Not with this AI. For all he knew, everything on his display was an utter lie. Or worse, an illusion, even to Black. When Black had tried to turn the ship around so they could prevent the beacon from reaching Pluto, some logic bomb or some damn thing had supposedly gone off, locking the ship on a course back to Trident and forcing all the humans into stasis. If the trio had placed that kind of program in her core, what was to keep them from altering the information they were looking at? That idea left him cold. Black was the ship. He could fly her, so he could change her navigation, pilot her anywhere in Sol system provided he had enough fuel and supplies. But he couldn't control every system or block her access, not without killing her. When we get back to Trident, he said aloud.
Excuse me, Lieutenant?
He shuddered for a moment, wondering if she read his thoughts, but they weren't communicating block to block. It would be impossible for her to know what he was thinking. For now. Nothing, Black. Just talking to myself. He brought up the navigation display and pursed his lips. The 2 KBOs we passed on our way to Pluto. Did you run a simulation on their trajectories?
Yes, Lieutenant.
The nav display changed to a 2D map with Neptune at the far right and a green dot in the middle of the map. 2 red dots appeared on the left side. As the green dot moved left, the 2 red dots moved to the right. Oakes scrunched his eyebrows together as he watched the dots move. Their trajectories seemed fixed on a single point. Oh, shit. They were headed for Trident Station.
A distinct possibility,
Black said. How the void is that possible?
Unknown.
Black said.
I do not have enough information to make an educated guess.
Oakes punched the console. Black, don't ever say that to me again. Just guess. The AI paused for a moment, either concerned about his anger or taking the time to weigh her words.
I guess
She said, managing to sound both morose and combative at the same time.
they were attracted by something near Trident Station or the Neptune shipyards. They may even have been attracted to Neptune itself.
That's a terrifying idea, he muttered. There's no way to figure out where S&R Red tried to intercept them?
Nor when.
Black said.
According to the trajectory paths and my projections, the KBOs should have reached Trident Station a few days ago. That's assuming constant speed.
Bad assumption, Oakes said, remembering how the other seemingly inert balls of ice and rock had not only changed their speed, but also their trajectories. But those hadn't been true KBOs. They had been conglomerations of creatures, orchestrating their propulsion to accelerate and modify their attitudes. They could have sped up considerably,
True.
Black said.
Another problem is the energy wave.
The energy wave. Oakes hadn't had time to review all the footage, let alone consider the ramifications, but if the beacon's collision with Pluto had been enough to wipe out all communications in Sol system, it was a good bet that it had also had an effect on the exosolar lifeforms. And the KBOs that had been on the course to Trident Station? He was certain they had been more of the creatures, beyond a doubt. Do we know exactly what the energy wave did to the creatures?
Yes and no. However, considering we're about to start our deceleration burns, perhaps it would be best to table this discussion until we reach our destination.
Oakes growled at the display. She was right, of course, but that didn't mean he had to like it. If S&R Red is still intact, do we have enough fuel to tow her? Black thought for a moment, and the display changed again.
Depending on her condition, we could tow her back to Trident Station, but our fuel margins will be extremely tight. Evasive action will not be possible. It would be best to pilot her back to Trident Station.
Of course it would. He checked the chronometer and shook his head. Guess it's time to get everyone in their couches,
Yes,
Black said. Oakes took a deep breath and exhaled slowly as he attempted to slow his pulse. The closer they approached S&R Red, the more likely they were to meet hostiles. He just hoped there was someone left alive who could tell them what had happened. There were only a few things Noble hated nearly as much as radiation leaks. Among them was attempting to find a short in one of the control systems, or maybe a shielding fault. The radiation leaks were by far the most difficult to deal with. Finding the leaking component wasn't a problem. The radiation detectors made that part easy. It was locating the actual leak on the component. A nicked connection coil, a damaged pressure hose, or an unseated bolt were the most likely suspects, and he'd already eliminated them all. Now it was time to guess which one of the million other scenarios fit the readings and go through the list. He wanted to chew his foot off. Black Company, Oakes said over the comms. Deceleration burns begin in 2 minutes. Get to your couches now. Noble lifted his middle finger at the camera in the upper corner of the engineering bay. If Oakes happened to be looking at that feed, he was probably fighting a laugh. Noble liked to imagine he was. Somebody should be laughing. He walked to the engineering acceleration couch and buckled in. Disgusted with his lack of progress on the leak, he connected to the engineering systems through his block. The bay disappeared as he entered virtual space, replaced by raw data streams from the engines and control systems. Monitoring Oakes's burns wouldn't take much brainpower, and he could focus on finding that damned radiation leak by adjusting the sensors, the way he should have done it in the first damn place. By the time Oakes had flipped the ship and started the deceleration burns, Noble had already reconfigured the diagnostics to narrow down the possibilities for the radiation leak. He quickly ran through the reports looking for anything out of the ordinary. There was no danger to the ship's propulsion. Quite the contrary. S&R Black had a few extra reactors in case the primaries went dark. So long as the backups worked, the ship could limp home, albeit at a greatly reduced speed, or maintain life support long enough for help to arrive. The joke being, of course, an S&R shouldn't need rescue. Noble thought he spotted the leak in the reactor manifold and groaned. He'd have to take apart the shielding, don a rad suit, remove the possibly damaged part, hunt for other perforations or leaks, and finally replace all the parts he'd had to remove just to get at the damned manifold. In other words, it was going to be a pain in the ass. They were a few hours away from home. Assuming they were able to quickly investigate S&R Red and get back on their homeward course, he could wait until they hit the hangar. With any luck, none of the exosolar creatures had followed them from Pluto, or had arrived first. That was what had terrified him when he'd first seen the damage report. He had ignored most of the briefing the captain had prepared and immediately headed to engineering the moment he had a magmug in his hands. The stasis fog hadn't retreated as fast as he'd liked, but there wasn't much he could have done about it. Besides, now he was more awake than he wanted to be, and this radiation leak was the reason. The creatures liked radiation. The creatures liked CO2. And the creatures had attacked him. A shiver crawled up his spine, making the VR suddenly feel cold. Noble tried to ignore the sensation. He was inside the ship, protected by the thick Atmos steel hull, and the sensors were looking for anything out of the ordinary. He was as safe as he could get. Well, as safe as he could get in this new world where the void-damned Kuiper Belt is a nursery for hungry aliens. What were those things anyway? As much as he wanted to push the memories of the starfish thing from his mind, he couldn't help thinking about them. The VR seemed to shrink around him. Noble shook his head in real life. Hard. The motion nearly knocked him out of the simulation, but the sensation departed, and he no longer felt like the VR was a vice slowly closing in on him. He brought up a group of windows, each displaying a different external cam feed. S&R Black had matched speed with S&R Red as expected. Once again, Oakes had managed to pull off a perfect approach, although he'd used more fuel than Noble liked. But the fuel problem wasn't the surprise. It was their target. S&R Red's hull looked as though it had been hit by multiple micrometeorite showers. Non-uniform divots, dings, and scratches marred the Atmos steel surface. Noble's throat constricted, the air no longer traveling easily into his lungs. Those things had been here. Red Company walked into a buzzsaw without a clue as to what they faced. "They're dead," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the VR. "They were all dead." No, were they? Really? They wouldn't know that until they boarded her, searched her, and found out for themselves. Even then, the crew could have used the escape pods and jettisoned back to Trident Station. No, even considering the possibility hurt. It invited hope and begged disappointment to appear in its place. Noble shook the thought away and began the shutdown sequence on the malfunctioning reactor. Once the captain gave the all clear, he could get right to work on it. The work would take all his concentration, which was good. He could forget about the monsters for a little while.